My name is Eric Hayden. I'm a meteorologist with the Weather Service in Morehead City, joined by Ryan Ellis today. Really appreciate you all joining us. We're thinking about you. We appreciate what you do, given the current situation. We miss you. I really miss seeing your faces and being at monthly meetings, working on tabletops. So it's very odd not to see you on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. But we do want to remind you that we're always here. Obviously, we had Arthur earlier this week, but our level of commitment has not changed. We may be in a different environment. Both Ryan and I are doing this from home today, but do not hesitate to call and ask for weather needs. Just because of our current situation doesn't change our effort in terms of weather. So please keep reaching out to us just like you always did before. We may present it a different way, but things have not changed on our end. Speaking of Ryan, I want to say hello to Ryan Ellis. If you haven't had a chance to meet him, he's our new Science Operations Officer. He joined us last fall. He's going to be touching a little bit on some of the science behind the hurricane forecast in terms of the track, how much it's improved through the years. And you'll be seeing a lot more of Ryan here in the coming months, especially when we can get back together and do talks in person. So this presentation is going to go over a little bit about preparedness and of course the hurricane seasonal forecast that just came out earlier this morning. I know we have a lot of folks on the call that have been with us many, many years, and we have some new emergency managers. We have some new core partners. So I want to briefly go over who we are. We cover Eastern North Carolina, so all the counties covered in yellow, we're responsible for you. The central part of the state is covered by Raleigh. Wilmington covers the southeast part of the state, and Wakefield covers the northeast part from the northern Outer Banks northward. So we cover the area in yellow. We serve any needs that you have in terms of weather. We are open 24/7. Our staff changes depending on the weather. So much like police and fire and hospitals, we have increased staffing during Florence. That's a picture of our operations area during Florence a couple years ago. And then if you visit us on a weekend or an overnight shift, there may only be 2 of us. So it just depends on what's going on weather-wise. We are one of the higher points. We are one of the higher points in Eastern North Carolina in terms of Carteret County. So we have a reinforced building, and we're there to stay for bad weather no matter what happens. That's my office in the upper right, so I have a nice place to sleep. And the lower left is our brick building with hurricane shutters. One of the best ways you can get information from us is our website, weather.gov/MoreheadCity. You can really find any type of information on that website, from the forecast itself, the hourly forecast, or since we're talking tropics, tropical information can be found on that site. We created a brand new website this year. We're really proud of it. We displayed it during Hurricane Preparedness Week, but we really want this to be for the whole season. If you go to weather.gov/MoreheadCity/Hurricane Prep, everything you need is there. It was based on the Hurricane Awareness Week, but there's tons of graphics. Media partners, I know you're on this call, emergency managers that use social media, please use these graphics. A lot of good stuff from preparation in terms of what you should have in your supply kit, and a lot of good information on impacts from tropical cyclones, not just winds, but rip currents, tornadoes, flooding. A lot of good information on the website. Encourage you to use it and especially share it on your websites and social media channels, and we'll use it prior to any storms that are headed our way. Most of you on this should be getting our weather briefings. If you are not, please email me. They are on our website. If you scroll down and click on weather hazard briefing, you should have access to a PDF document during active weather. So the 2 examples then are there are Florence and a winter storm a couple years ago. And we issue these during periods of active weather. And again, for you new folks, if you're not on the email list, if you're not currently getting these, please reach out to me, because you should be getting these directly from our email list. Last thing before I turn it over to Ryan here in a second, a couple more minutes, please share our information on social media. We really use social media as a way to wave our hands and say, this is what you should focus in on. I still use the example on the left from Florence. When the category of the storm was lowering, we were really trying to emphasize that, hey, we can't let our guard down. Category only focuses on wind. We have a lot of impacts that are still expected with Florence. And YouTube, that's where we're going to post this webinar here afterwards. We use that a lot from some of our longer videos, including the webinars we conduct with you. So please look at that when you can. All right, we get a lot of questions in the forecast office. When is the outlook coming out? It usually comes out about the 3rd week of May, and this was recently released this morning. Probably not the news you want to hear, but you're probably not shocked because I know some local academic universities have released their own forecasts, and this is very, very similar. Due to a combination of a bunch of factors, we're going toward a more favorable period for tropical weather, transitioning toward either a neutral phase or even a La Nina. That's more conducive for hurricanes. You've probably already seen the water temperatures have been above average, so many factors are in place that it's not going to be a quiet year. 60% chance of above normal season, a 30% chance of near normal. So I like to focus on that. It's a 90% chance we're going to have a normal to above normal season. So it's a pretty high threshold that it's not going to be below normal, only a 10% chance of that. The prediction set from the Climate Center is 13 to 19 named storms, 6 to 10 hurricanes, and 3 to 6 major hurricanes. So unfortunately, kind of what we've been used to over the last couple of years looks like another active season. That's our seasonal, or not ours, but the names for 2020. They're decided by the World Meteorological Organization. We've already had Arthur. You can take a look at some of those names if you're interested in that. And that information is certainly available on the Hurricane Center website as well. So we spend the least amount of time, this is going to be about a 30-ish, maybe 35-minute presentation today. We spend the least time on the forecast because it really doesn't matter in terms of how many or how little storms we have any given year. It matters, is it the one that hits our area? It only takes one storm. So think back to 2017. Do you remember that year at all? You probably remember the names Harvey, Irma, and Maria. Some of you I know were deployed to those areas to help out. But as far as we're concerned here in North Carolina, it was a quiet year. We had some near misses, but we didn't have any storms that directly impacted us over the land area. But it was very active. 17 storms, certainly a big year with 6 major hurricanes. Do you remember 2018? I know the answer. Of course, you do. Florence and Michael. It was, we had less storms that year, less hurricanes, less major hurricanes, but did it really matter? We were directly impacted by 2 major storms in our region. The whole point of that is you should be preparing each and every year for just that at least one storm. Even if we were saying it was going to be a weak year, it doesn't mean we let our guard down. Each and every year, I know a lot of you are very seasoned and experienced, so you know this, but we have some new people in our area. Each year, we should be preparing for the possibility of a storm in our state. And just kind of remember that. The hurricane seasonal forecast is fun to look at. It's interesting. But again, we should be preparing each and every year, really regardless of what that forecast says. As far as the climatology goes, we use this all the time. This is a graph showing when the peak of hurricane season is. It correlates to when the water is the warmest. So roughly about the middle part of September. The orange or red shading are hurricanes and tropical storms, and the yellow shading are hurricanes. And we had Dorian and Florence about the peak of hurricane season. That's when we usually see the highest impact and the most frequency of storms in our area. With that said, as you all just saw last week, we are equal opportunity here in North Carolina. We start as early as May. We had Arthur this year, and we've had Arthur in July. We've had Sandy as late as into the late fall. So really anytime from May on, we are at risk for tropical cyclones. I know hurricane season doesn't start officially until June 1st, but tropical cyclones don't follow that some years. I think, Ryan, was it the 6th straight year that we've had a named storm in the Atlantic Basin. So you should really be, ramping hurricane preparedness up now. And that's what Arthur did this year, really reemphasize that we should be prepared from this day forward. All right, I'm going to talk about a couple quick new products, then turn it over to Ryan with some science on how good the forecast has gotten, especially with regards to the forecast track. Not a lot of huge changes this year. We did storm surge watch and warning the last couple years, time of arrival graphics the last couple years. This year, just some minor tweaks. The biggest two are the 60-hour forecast and some new surge graphics from the Hurricane Center. So this is the traditional hurricane cone that you are all aware of. The big change this year is the Hurricane Center is adding the 60-hour point. So that will give you a nice break point between 48 and 72 hours for your decision making. This information also will be incorporated into the surge graphics and forecast, along with the wind speed probabilities for the tropical cyclone. So pretty big improvement to add another point in terms of the forecast, and you'll notice that with the upcoming season. One of the other changes is with regards to storm surge. This is mainly for you broadcasters and anybody that wants to display this information on social media. The storm surge graphics are great, but they're meant to zoom in and zoom out and see some detail. They're not the best for posting on social media. And again, I'm talking about those images that say greater than 3 feet or 6 feet or 9 feet. So the Hurricane Center is testing this year, and they welcome feedback, a wider, more graphical approach, just to give you the quick and dirty, where do we expect storm surge and how high will the values be? And again, this is mainly for social media. I could see us posting this, Ryan, on like social media posts. I could see media partners using this, that type of thing. So that's two of the changes that are occurring this year. So not a lot, because the Hurricane Center has done such a good job through the years at making changes. So now I'm going to turn things over to Ryan Ellis. I mentioned he's our Science Operations Officer. He's going to talk a little bit about a science update. I think it's really neat, coming from an inland office down to the Carolinas, how much goes into the improvement year to year and how the Hurricane Center tracks how they do. And Ryan's going to talk a little bit about that and show you some of the leaps and bounds they've really made with the forecasting.
Yeah, hi everybody. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Ryan Ellis. I'm the new Science and Operations Officer here in Morehead City. But you know, I've been no stranger to hurricanes over the years. Prior to this, I did about a decade in Raleigh, where we were affected by many of the same storms that you guys were. Maybe some different aspects at times, with the inland flooding being a huge deal as you go inland from the state. But prior to that, I was out in Hawaii, where I did graduate work, learned about storms in the Pacific Basin out there, and my bachelor's degree is from the University of Miami. So hurricanes been around in my background for a long time, and while I was in Miami, I got a chance to work with some folks that are still at the Hurricane Center today, and they've got a great, really dedicated staff, and they're always, you know, adding new things and tracking how well they're doing. So as part of that this year, I want to show where we are with leaps and bounds ahead of where we were decades ago in track forecasting. Now, if you look at this graph here, you'll notice that there's nothing prior to 1960. So what happened in 1960? Well, TIROS, the first satellite, was launched, and it lasted for a mere 78 days. So didn't even make it to the 3-month mission that it was scheduled to do. But that was really the beginning of the satellite age. And it wasn't until 1965 that we got to see the global picture of the weather all at once. And so you'll notice that as we go on further, you'll see tracks improving, especially out in these 48 to 72 hour time frames. As we get into the 80s, we start to see really big improvements in what we now know as numerical modeling or weather models. And in fact, the famous European model was started in 1985. And so look at the difference between 1980 and 1990 with how much improvement there was in track forecasting in that time. And then as computing power has grown over the years, that error has just continued to shrink down through the 2000s and the 2010s. And so now, you know, I want you to look at this 48 to 72 hour window, because we know that a lot of decisions are being made in that time frame. And if I gave you a guess on where that forecast was, you'd have a 400-mile window there of where that storm was going to hit. And now we can do it between 50 and 100 miles. So that's a lot less people being evacuated. That's a lot less people having to prepare and spend money to board up their homes and things like that. So pretty incredible when you look at those numbers. Now, if we go more recently, we always hear it, right? We hear how the European is doing, how the GFS model is doing, this model or that model. But if you step back and look at the data, NHC beats them every time. And the last couple of years were no no exception here. At every time frame, NHC added more skill to the forecast than any of the major models. Now, what you're seeing on this graph is the difference between climatology, or where the storm would typically go if you looked at history. So it's hard to improve on that in the very short time frames. That's why these numbers are so low early on. But as you go out in time, we know that storms don't follow climatology. And in those really important periods where people are trying to prepare, NHC is adding as much as 70 to 75% skill to the track. So that's incredible. That was 2017. 2018, more of the same. You can see where it's kind of neck and neck with the ECMWF, or the European model. And then as we got into 2019, again, more of the same, pretty close with the European all the way through 36 hours. But again, in those longer time frames when people are trying to move resources, get things together, NHC does a really, really good job. Now I want you to take a look at this. This is incredible. This is how far we've come with the 3-day track error. Okay, so 1999, when Floyd hit, 3 days out, we would tell you that there was a window somewhere between the Chesapeake Bay and St. Simon's Island, Georgia, that this thing is going to hit. If Floyd were hitting today, we could knock that down to a window between the South Carolina border and somewhere south of Topsail Island. So incredible, incredible improvements. So now we talk about these spaghetti models a lot, and we see them posted everywhere. Every new model cycle, there's a spaghetti model. And so the first problem with these is, which one do you look at? Well, naturally, you're going to want to look at the ones that are hitting your area. And so we're very biased towards those tracks that are hitting the area. And so there might be, 25 tracks that are well offshore, but that one that hits North Carolina, that's the one that's going to get the attention, right? So we want to move people away from that and towards the cone, because we already showed that NHC does a better job than the models already. So we look at the cone, but we also need to understand that this cone only represents what happens 2/3 of the time. That's how they make the size of the cone. So 1/3 of the time, we still could have, impacts well outside the cone. So, use the cone for your information, but you got to be very careful about how you interpret that. Another interesting thing about these models versus what happened with Dorian, when the storm, we know what happened when it hit North Carolina, but if we think back to earlier in the storm's history, Dorian was the one that went over Abaco Island in the Bahamas, virtually destroying everything. It was a Cat 5 and it was heading for South Florida. It was moving west and it was 90 miles offshore and heading to the west. Now, Miami has about 2.5 million people in it. So do you know how many were evacuated? 0. That's because of the improvements we've had with our forecasting. Nobody was evacuated from Miami or Broward counties because the forecast showed that it was going to turn offshore. There was a high confidence in that. And so as a result, we cut down evacuations on the coast by about 3.5 million less people than would have been evacuated prior. So incredible, incredible improvements. But we do know that intensity forecasting is still difficult. While we've increased tremendously with track, intensity has not improved as much over time, but we can still see in this graph here, if we look at the slopes of the lines, we want it to slope further down to indicate a increase in skill as far as intensity goes. And you can see at some of the longer periods, 4 and 5 days, that actually spiked upward a little bit in 2019. And so we're making improvements, but just not as big as we were on the track side. And there's a lot of factors that go into that, a lot of physics that go into rapid intensification of storms and things like that. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Eric, and he's going to talk a little bit more about intensity.
All right, Ryan, thank you very, very much. I appreciate you presenting on that. It's good information, especially like you were saying that the track and forecasts are certainly continue to get better. But one thing I want to kind of follow up on what he mentioned about the intensity, in talking about timelines, I know you all have certain timelines to get people out of your counties. There's certain things you think about, and those may be hard to change. I certainly understand that, but looking for possible issues down the road, I want to focus on the intensity part and how perhaps you might want to rethink some of your timelines, or at least practice them in workshops and tabletops. Is there any way you can adjust them forward and being quicker? These slides are from Mike Brennan and Ken Graham down at the Hurricane Center, showing Hurricane Florence. We had 10 days. It was kind of hurry up and get here because we've been waiting so long, day after day after day, waiting for this storm to get here. So on the flip side, we had plenty of time to evacuate. We had plenty of time to do whatever we needed to do. That's not always going to be the case. What if Michael had happened off the Carolina coast and we only had 3 to 4 days to prepare? Michael went from a tropical storm to a Cat 5 hurricane in a very, very short period of time. So I want you to start thinking about your timeline. I know some folks, you can't just adjust it because you have certain restrictions, especially on the islands and stuff like that. But just at least consider it, at least have that in your head. Maybe that's something we can work at a tabletop and just at least discuss it. The other one that really highlights that, 3 of our nation's most powerful hurricanes, 3 days before they happened, all 4, excuse me, 4 of our most powerful hurricanes were only tropical storms 3 days out. So Michael, Camille, the Labor Day storm, and Andrew. 3 days before landfall, they were tropical storms. And the other thing I found interesting from this graphic, you look at the Labor Day storm or Andrew, this is a favorable area for the storm to turn up the coast. What if we have a tropical storm by the Bahamas and it goes through a rapid period of intensification and moves quickly into our area? We're not going to have that long timeline to get folks away from the coast. So something just to consider. I know we're doing really well in the track forecasting like Ryan mentioned, but still want to be cognizant of, he mentioned a third of the time the track is going to be a little off, and be cognizant that we're not the best at intensity forecasting. So kind of, think about those timelines as we're going forward. One of these days, unfortunately, we're not going to have a storm like Florence where we have many, many days to think about it. So the last part of the presentation is going to be pretty short and quick, I think, because it's a lot of stuff you've already seen. Want to reiterate the products we have for you to look at, and then want to reiterate that you should focus on all of the impacts with any tropical cyclone. Then we're going to turn it over to you for questions. So again, for a lot of you, this is a repeat, but we appreciate you sharing this with folks in the community, because we have a lot of people moving to the area each year that are new. They haven't been through Florence. They didn't go through Dorian. So remind yourselves that this is still new information for some people each and every year. The graphical tropical outlook from the Hurricane Center is issued 4 times a day. This example in the lower right is from ahead of Arthur this past week. So this is a good go-to product. Go to the Hurricane Center website, which is just hurricanes.gov. Kind of have a good look. Are there any areas they're watching out in the ocean for potential development? A good first step to see what's going on in terms of weather coming our way. Ryan mentioned this. Most of you are familiar with the Hurricane Center forecast cone. The forecast cone shows you nothing about the impacts. It doesn't show you who's going to be impacted and who won't. It is only showing you the most likely path of just the center of the storm. And 2/3 of the time, the center of the storm is going to go in this path. A third of the time, it could be wrong. So keep that in mind. And even if it's right, like what we saw with Florence, a hurricane is not a dot. It's not just a center on a map. It extends hundreds of miles wide. So even if you're not in the cone per se, that doesn't mean that you're not going to be impacted. So please keep that in mind. And unfortunately, I know a lot of us know this show because we've been through it here for many, many years. New graphics from a couple years ago that are quite useful. The most likely arrival time of tropical storm force winds. This is when we expect the winds to most likely arrive in the area. So this is our 90% chance. And you'll see specific time thresholds, Monday at 8 a.m., Tuesday at 8 a.m. We still like to be general with these. So we might say something like sometime Monday morning, sometime Tuesday morning to give us a little wiggle room. But this is the most likely time that tropical storm force winds will be there. The reason why I hesitated, I don't know how I left it out, Ryan. Yeah. I meant to also have in there, I don't know how I left it out, the other one, which was the earliest reasonable tropical storm force winds. And that's your reasonable worst case scenario. That's what you should be planning for in terms of evacuations. And if people are done all their preparedness and all their planning, things they need to do, the earliest reasonable is a worst case scenario, the 10% chance of those winds getting there. And I apologize, I must have just forgot that slide. That's why I hesitated, because I was expecting the earliest reasonable and not the most likely first. Storm surge watches and warnings, again, nothing new. The example on this slide is from Hurricane Florence. So watches are issued in advance of life-threatening storm surge, which is inundation of 3 feet higher or greater. And we're talking above normally dry ground. Upgrading to a warning means it's imminent. So you'll get those watches and warnings, and then on the bottom is an example of those potential storm surge flooding maps. Again, they're very useful if you zoom in, but as you can see on a briefing or social media, sometimes they can be hard to read. So that's why the Hurricane Center is experimenting with that more zoomed out map for social media purposes and dissemination. All right. I want to start talking about impacts, because that's what's most important. I want you to close your eyes. I want you to think of a hurricane. What do you see? Do you see wind? Do you see rain? Do you see a lot of work? Many long hours? You know, for a lot of us, it's going to be different. But what do you see when you think of a hurricane? Now think of it from the public's perspective. They're probably thinking wind, wind, wind. It's really all about the impacts, and the impacts go far beyond wind, and they go far beyond a category. We're always, a lot of times we focus too much on the category, which is only related to wind. Since 2010, we've had 175 direct deaths and over $100 billion in damage from just category ones. And I put just category ones in quotes, because anytime I do a preparedness talk, especially people have lived here for a while or maybe haven't been through the worst part of a storm, they say they're not leaving unless it's a category 2 or 3 or 4. Remind yourself, category is only focused on wind. It only tells us about how strong the winds are. It says nothing about the rainfall, the surge, rip currents, or tornadoes. So please, re-emphasize with people in your community that cyclones, tropical cyclones, are more than just wind. There's a lot of impacts that can occur with them. And we're going to go through each impact, and you'll notice that wind is 4th on the list for a reason. First impact, rainfall, flooding. Water is what kills. You've seen this graphic before. It's through 2012. 90% of deaths are water related, whether that's rainfall, freshwater flooding, or storm surge. So it's water, water, water. If you look very, very carefully, can a tree fall and somebody dies or gets injured? Yes. Do we have deaths because of winds and even tornadoes? Yes. Is it the dominant one? No. Less than 10% are attributed to wind. That's an older graphic, so you might say, well, maybe things have changed. Unfortunately not. Since 2016, 83% of deaths in a tropical cyclone have been water related. And we have made some improvement in terms of what type of water related. We're not seeing as many storm surge deaths as we did before. Only 4% are related to storm surge, but still 83% of our deaths are water related. So nothing has changed. It's still water, water, water in terms of our biggest issues. And where are our biggest issues? They are in vehicles. That's the same thing outside of tropical cyclones as well, but more than half of our deaths are occurring in vehicles during these landfalling systems since 2016. So continue to emphasize that water is a big aspect of any tropical cyclone. You could have just a tropical depression or just a tropical storm and not even have a category scale and have 10, 15, 20 inches of rain, and that certainly is going to have a big impact on you. We saw it with Florence. We as meteorologists are trying to make as accurate of a forecast as we can, but we're trying to get better at the messaging, because you're not going to do better than that forecast. The forecast on the left is the 5-day rainfall when it was 200 miles away. A bullseye of heavy rain in the Wilmington, Morehead City area, a lot of rain through the Carolinas. The example on the right is what happened. Ryan can attest to this. Can we make slight improvements here and there? A little bit. Where we can make our biggest improvement is communication. 16 of the 17 deaths were in vehicles. What happened? We had a great forecast. That message is not getting out, that water is a big threat and that a lot of it is in vehicles. In my mind, there's certainly preventable deaths. This is an example from Hookerton during Matthew. And again, unfortunately, we've been a prime example with a hotspot for storms here over the last couple of years. We always tell people it only takes 6 inches of water to knock a person off their feet, 2 feet of water to sweep a vehicle away. So people see this water, they say, I think I can get through it. I've got a big truck, I've got 4-wheel drive. That doesn't look too fast. They don't realize A, the power of water, and they don't realize B, that road might not be there. We saw numerous examples. I appreciate Dublin County joining us. We saw numerous examples in Florence because of road washouts. So again, the water is very powerful, number one, and you don't know if that road is even there anymore. And this is especially the case at night. So our campaign with that still hasn't changed. Turn around, don't drown. Just really encouraging folks, just stay home. Don't get out there and venture around. And this is especially cognizant in our area days after the storm. Storm's gone and our rivers are coming up, to not let their guard down and cross areas that they shouldn't. Second impact from any tropical cyclone could be storm surge. Again, we have examples of that. We had Florence, and just a couple years ago, produced 8 to 11 feet. A lot of you are familiar with the example on the upper left is from New Bern. Some of the surge values that we had there are quite high. We had 8 to 11 feet of surge in the New Bern area and over 1,800 water rescues. The example on the bottom is Highway 24. This is between where Ryan lives and where I live, the western part of Carteret County. 2 to 4 feet of storm surge on Highway 24, something we've never seen before. So certainly impressive with Florence. And then unfortunately we had this past year, it's hard to believe that it wasn't years ago. When I put this presentation together, Ryan, I just can't believe it was not that long ago. It seems like we've lived a lifetime in this last year. Dorian, Ocracoke, Hatteras Island, very, very rapid rise of water. We talk about that with storm surge, and 4 to 7 feet, you might say, well, hey, that was less than what New Bern saw. It came up in a matter less than an hour. It really, really came up very fast. So that's why we're concerned with storm surge in terms of being an impact from any system. Rip currents, you might say, well, Eric, you talked about flooding and storm surge. Your rip currents, you haven't even gotten to wind yet. We've had more people die in rip currents than wind events here in the Carolinas. An example of that is Hurricane Lorenzo in 2019, last year. You might say, I must have missed that one. You didn't miss it. It missed us by a couple thousand miles, but it was the northernmost Category 5 storm on record, very, very powerful storm, and it can generate ocean swells that reach the East Coast. And unfortunately, we had 8 rip current fatalities in the United States. And we saw that with this past storm with Arthur. I don't think we've had any issues, but I know, or no deaths that I'm aware of, but you're aware of the rescues that we had. It was a great beach weekend last weekend. Folks are getting out of their homes more. And we had a lot of rip-related rescues this past weekend. That was days in advance of Arthur. So keep rip currents in your mind for ahead of storms. We're certainly not anticipating folks swimming out in the middle of a storm, but we're talking days leading up to it. We finally got to wind. It's not to belittle it, but it's just that so much emphasis is focused on the scale, the Saffir-Simpson scale. It's a great scale for wind. It's wind damage. Category 1 storms are going to have lighter winds than the Category 5, but this scale doesn't tell you how much rain you're going to see, the surge, how large the storm is, the slow movement. That's what got us with Florence, right? It was a very slow movement. It's not captured on one scale. These are some of the winds that we did see with Florence. Again, we still have people in my neighborhood that are getting roofs repaired. It's not that wind is not an issue. It's just in terms of life killing, water usually kills more. 100-mile-per-hour winds along the coast, and it really was the duration, 3-4 days of the constant wind. And since we had so much rain, we had a lot of tree damage from the grounds being softened up. Think back to another just Category 1, Irene, 2011, big storm. big wind field. And we had pretty much everybody had 60 to 70 mile per hour winds, even you folks, Duplin, Pitt, Martin counties, even farther inland. And then the strongest part of the storm went over the western Pamlico Sound. We had wind speeds over 100 miles per hour. So another example of a category. Please, with new people moving to the area, de-emphasize just category. Make sure they focus on all the impacts from any storm. Last but not least is tornadoes. Any landfalling system or any cyclone that's near us can produce tornadoes. It's already rotating and it can produce these tornadoes. It doesn't have to be necessarily a hurricane. We saw it with Hermine. So it doesn't have to be just a hurricane. It could be any tropical cyclone. They often occur with little notice. They can produce enhanced areas of damage. So like with Florence, we had wind damage all over, but some more intense damage were associated with the tornadoes. In the example with Dorian, they can and will occur well away from the actual landfall. So as soon as those outer bands, those outer fringes reach our coast, we're at risk. And this may be 12 hours, maybe a day in advance. So please keep that in mind for your evacuations and your planning. As soon as those outer bands reach us, we are at risk for tornadoes. This is really an incredible graphic for the amount of tornadoes and really emphasizing Ryan's point, my point, that impacts occur well away from the center. Where did Florence hit? Right near Wrightsville Beach, Wilmington, right down where this red arrow is. They had tornadoes up in Richmond. We had 27 tornadoes in North Carolina, 6 in South Carolina, and 11 in Virginia. So widespread area was impacted by the tornadoes from Florence. So please keep that in mind. All right, we're wrapping things up here just to refresh yourself with some of the highlights. Understand the category and track of the storm doesn't tell us anything about impacts. Know that we can have 5 impacts. We saw this with Arthur. We had heavy rain and continue to see heavy rain, and rip currents. Those were our biggies with Arthur. So they can be any 5 impacts with any cyclone. Heavy rain, tornadoes, flooding can precede these landfalling systems. So don't delay in terms of your planning purposes. Do not drive through flooded roads. We mentioned that's our biggest impact, unfortunately, with tropical cyclones. And for us, we get the heavy rain and then the rivers slowly come up. So this can last for many, many days. And I know we have experience with this, having issues getting back, having issues moving supplies around because everything's cut off by the rising water. If folks decide to stay, make sure they have multiple ways to get warnings. They have their cell phone charged up. They have their weather radio. They're probably not out shopping during a hurricane, but they need to know, hey, now's the time to get into an interior room, lowest elevation in my house, because a tornado warning has been issued. All right, that's about it. That's a lot of information to cover. Those are our email addresses. So appreciate any feedback. For a lot of